Well, we're really proud of you guys.
Great win, man.
Really,
Great win.
really. You know, by the way, when I was down in New Zealand not long ago, I was bragging about you guys. They almost didn't let me off the island. You know what I mean? Anyway, we are gigantic fans. And the three of us, when we were in law school and college, we played rugby, but never like you guys.
Next on Rugby Wrap-Up, Legends of the Game, Spring and Hook. Rugby Wrap-Up brought to you in part by Sheehy Auto Stores. It's easy at Sheehy. Box for Grow, the future of cannabis farming. We box you in to increase your yield and profit. The Pig and Whistle, the world's best rugby pub. And Lean and Limber, stretching your way to a healthier lifestyle. Hello and welcome back to Rugby Wrap-Up. Matt McCarthy in New York City. Thank you for tuning in once again. And we have a special treat. We have legends of the game in Mr. Dick Spring and Mr. George Hook. And it's not every day that I wear a shirt and tie and a jacket for a rugby show, but these dignitaries certainly deserve it. George Hook, of course, is a familiar face and featured guest. He is the former Director of Rugby for USA Rugby, coach of the Irish women's national team, an assistant coach on Team USA's men's team in 1987, and famously a television rugby analyst for RTE Irish television. Mr. Dick Spring, the former Munster and Ireland player. He had listed that first, curiously enough, but the captain of the greatest and oldest club in the United States of America, the New York Rugby Club, and this other thing called the former Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland. And it's, you say, not bad for a waiter at the Mad Hatter in New York City, Mr. Spring. All right, guys, let's get right down to it. I had a question out of the gate for the two of you, and Dick, you can take it first. Both of you lived here in America and were involved in the rugby landscape here. How did that happen for you, Dick, and why?
Well, back in 1975, I actually arrived in the States on a Rugby Wanderers from London. We were on a tour of the East Coast, and at the time I actually intended to stay on after the tour or not, but things didn't work out quite like that, and I was going to go to Canada where I had a job offer, but a friend of mine said, "There's no money in Canada, why don't you stay here?" So I didn't intend playing rugby. I'd been up to my tonsils in rugby for the previous 10 years in college in Dublin. And my friend said, "But if you want to work in the Mad Hatter, owned by John Barnes, one of the best known seasons, I had to play rugby." So I took on, I decided I'd play on the wing. Never having played on the wing before, I said I'd play on the wing just to make a small contribution. And never seeing the ball, I ended up playing scrum half.
Full disclosure, I am a fellow member of the New York Rugby Club, and I have I had some intel and some background on you from the likes of Greg Payne, Des O'Brien, Jeff Andrews, the list goes on and on, Steve Thompson, and some of it's colorful that we can't get into on this program.
Don't believe a word of it.
None of it's true. I know none of it is true. Absolutely not. But if I'm getting this right, you were over here when you were already a barrister to save money waiting tables so that you could start your own practice back in Ireland.
That was the idea. Well, originally I had decided I wanted to go to New Zealand, and many people have asked the question, why New Zealand? There wasn't a great connection between Ireland and New Zealand. I looked at the map, and the furthest place on the globe I could see, the furthest place from Kerry was New Zealand. I wanted to get away. My family were very heavily involved in politics, and I thought it'd be nice to get to politics and nobody would know who Dick Spring was. So the plan was New Zealand, but unfortunately I didn't get there at that time. And works, I now have 3 grandchildren living in New Zealand. Our only daughter moved out there with a Kiwi husband about 8 years ago. So it's now very much on our map.
That's awesome. And George, that segues to your experience in America as a rugby coach and popping up on the radar in New Zealand in 1987.
Well, in 1985, I was having a cup of coffee in a Dublin hotel, and I saw these American rugby players, and I said, "Who are you?" And they said, "We're the Old Blues from California." And I said, "Who's the coach?" And they said, "Jeff Hollings, former Eagles hooker," but I didn't know that. I coached them with Jeff while they were in Ireland. As a result of that, I got an invite to address the National Coaching Conference the following year in Lawrence, Kansas. I met Ron Mays, who was preparing for the '87 World Cup. He asked me to assist him and George Betzler in the coaching of the Eagles in Australia in the '87 World Cup. And then 4 years later, in an effort to avoid my creditors, the police, and sundry other people, I took a job as Director of Rugby for USA Rugby. I was asked by Ron Mays, could I find somebody? And I said, absolutely me. And I went there, and thanks to somebody who has just been installed in the Rugby Hall of Fame, Bob Hoder at Rugby Import, sadly dead, Bob funded the whole operation. And I abandoned my wife and children and commuted from Dublin to Providence, Rhode Island, and ran rugby for 5 years in America before I was sacked, as happens to all the great coaches. That was the best thing that ever happened to me. Jack Clark thought he was rid of me by getting me sacked, instead of which I got picked up in television, and I had a real job for the first time in my life at age 55.
Amazing, amazing. And they only fire the greatest coaches. I mean, we might want to add that, right? Only the greatest get fired. George, you said one topic dominates right-thinking rugby people. What did you mean by that?
The game is doomed. That's why it dominates all talk. You can't have a game in which the possibility of people losing 50% of their lifetime through early dementia and Alzheimer's caused by rugby football, then the game for the first time in 150 years is unplayable by ordinary people. And the mothers of Ireland, New Zealand, and the rest of the world will be the ones, like the suffragettes of old. They will force World Rugby to make it change. But sadly, World Rugby, with hundreds of legal cases coming down the track for men and indeed women who are now facing early dementia, and are doing nothing. And in the last couple of weeks, one of the greatest prop forwards in the history of New Zealand, indeed the game, Carl Heyman, at 41, has effectively had the rest of his life ended. We can't have a game like that. And for the first time in my entire life, I will not see 1 second of rugby union in the November internationals of any kind, because this game is not for me.
What's the solution then? Because I've gone on both sides of this argument as somebody I've been knocked out 6 times. I've had double-digit concussions, and I look at it as it was all my choice. I knew what I was doing, and I wasn't even getting paid.
Well, you didn't know what you were doing. That's the whole point. Now we know. If you were playing now, you would know what you're doing, and you'd be able to make a choice. You tell me. I've got 3 grandsons playing rugby, all schoolboys. I'm not going to tell them not to play. What kind of a schoolboy at 12 goes up to his teacher and says, "Hello, teacher, my granddad told me not to play rugby"? I'm not going to do that. But he's not capable of making the decision. He's utterly not capable of making the decision. At the other end, I have a real problem with young men risking terminal damage to their brains for the enjoyment of a beer-swilling audience of 70,000 people watching it. True, they're going to get well paid for it, but that money will eventually be used for their care in later years.
Dick, what's your take on this?
Well, George has a very valid point. Going back 15, 20 years, my late brother, who was a medical doctor, couldn't believe the physicality of rugby and the way people were putting their heads in as battering rams, basically, except that guys have gotten bigger and guys have gotten faster. And certainly the game is going to have to be changed, looking at the number of injuries that are accumulating. So I think there's a real challenge. Part of the challenge is just how much rugby can people play.
If you're 18 years old right now, do you play rugby again?
A lot of soul searching, I think. I mean, it's like George was saying about his grandkids. Mine are a bit young to be thinking of games just yet. But I think there'll be a lot of questions being asked players. And, it's something that's been around for a long time. Dr. Barry O'Driscoll, established a reputation trying to protect players. The powers that be weren't listening for a long time. They are beginning to listen. And I think the evidence is so going to have to address this question in the interest of people's safety.
George, do we just stop playing?
Well, we can change the game, like there's climate change. So suddenly we meet in Glasgow and the civilized nations of the globe get together and say, look, we can solve this problem. There's got to be a Glasgow of rugby, and we've got to say, how are we going to make this game safer? Then World Rugby can change it. So what have they done? In an effort to make the scrum safer, they've made it more dangerous. In an effort to make the ruck quicker, they've made it more dangerous. In everything about the game in the 21st century is immeasurably more dangerous than it was in the previous century and a half. And like when I went to school and when Dick went to school, the coach said to us, look for space. So we ran into space. What does the coach tell the modern player? He says, look for the biggest thing you can find on the pitch and run into it like some runaway tractor in an onion field. And that's what the players do. The scrum half now no longer passes to the fly half. He passes more often, in other words, more than 50% of the time, to a player other than the fly half. Extraordinary. He finds the biggest fella in his side to give it the ball to him, to hit the biggest fella in their side. Now we get the ball back, we give it to another big fella, hits another big fella, ad infinitum. And we see, because the television commentators tell us, in all, they say, and we are now at the 32nd ruck.
Okay, so we do have some experimental changes going on, some experimental laws, like the 50-22 and the in-goal dropout if you hold the team up in your try zone or your. So the purpose of the 50-22 is to try to open the game up for running attacks more instead of having all these guys lined up. And you've got the guys that have to drop back deep, maybe even 4 players drop back deep, Dick, as a form of fullback. How do you see this law?
I think the jury is out, Matt, at this stage. I really haven't seen enough of it being implemented. But from my point of view, just take up the point George was making, we've got to get this game opening up again. You have a ruck nowadays with 4 people inside in the ruck, so you've got the other 26 waiting to clash off one another. No space. And, what people want to see is the backlines of old, getting the ball out to the wing, taking the man on the outside, reverse passes in midfield. And there's no space to do this anymore. And that's a big, big problem. But, I think the jury is out. Let's see how it works.
The world's front row forwards have said the scrum is now more dangerous than ever before. And what are they doing about it? This is a program. There might be children watching, so I won't tell you what they're doing with it.
Fair enough. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but we're going to come back with Dick Spring and George Hook right after this.
Looking for your next vehicle? With Sheehy's Easy Search, choose from over 3,000 new and used vehicles. Shop, trade, or buy online or in store. We make it easy with our award-winning service.
It's easy at Sheehy. Sheehy.com.
If you're in New York City and want to watch some great rugby, have some great food, and some great times, go to the world's best rugby pub, the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street. And we are back with Mr. Dick Spring and Mr. George Hook. Gentlemen, we had a lively first half of the show, but I want to change gears a little bit. Dick, you know a thing or two about politics. I was just wondering what your take was on politics in rugby right now. Is it better, worse, or the same, or absent as far as when you were actively playing rugby?
I would say that it has become a lot worse, the politics of the present day game. And of course, a lot of influence or a lot of concentration now is on money. The game has been dominated by money, and not a good thing in rugby in the old days. And there's a big challenge for the administrators. I think they're really overplaying the players nowadays. I mean, in my time, the season it ended on the 1st of September again. And you had a restricted season, and I think you got maybe 30 games max. But whereas nowadays, I just really worry year round. In very difficult conditions, testing conditions, up and flying all over the world, keep up with the pace. So I think we've got to try and get back to restricted seasons and global game a bit more coordinated. Obviously, there's huge friction between Southern Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere, which is unresolved as we speak.
Then you have the politics of the disciplinary process, which is a joke. So a fella launches himself feet first, a New Zealander, and only the grace of God keeps the stud out of the other player's eye. So then he gets a couple of weeks. So then they say, well, actually, he was a very nice fella when we talked to him. Yeah. So we halved it. And then he apologized. So we took another week off. So then suddenly the perpetrators of abuse that would get them 6 months in jail if they did it in the street get 3 or 4 weeks.
What is one change that you'd like to see impacted or put into works in rugby, George?
Once upon a time, the scrum was a major attacking platform. So you got a quick heel from the hooker. The number 8 could pick it up and transfer it to the 9. The 9 could make a quick break and pass the blindside wing. The scrum was an attacking platform. And a former coach of Dick Springs and my dentist, the great Rowley Meats, believed that the quick ball in the scrum was one of the single most important attacking options in the game. The scrum is also what makes rugby union different from everything else on the planet. And they've destroyed it. Now, how have they destroyed it? I know a ton of your viewers are looking and saying, oh, no, he's going to talk about the scrum. I don't understand the scrum. Okay, so viewer, if you're leaning up against the kitchen door and you want to push it open with both hands, would you put your feet straight back behind you so as soon as the door opened, you fell flat on your face? Or would you bring one or two, both feet under you to support your body weight? Answer: no, of course. So for 100 years, the great prop forwards of the game, supported their own body weight by having their feet underneath them. Now, if you look at it, their feet are so far back, it's not true. So there's only one result. The scrum falls flat on its face. That's me. The scrum first, and then you can have the other stuff.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with the word George said there. I mean, we've got to be very careful about players' safety, and the scrum has become a very, very difficult arena in the game now. There was a time when backs used to consider the scrum as where you got 16 guys out of the way so the backs could play rugby. You know, had the 8 and 8. But certainly we don't see that scrum be as part of the game now. The fast moving game that George was talking about, that Rowley Meats was all in favour of. And you've got to find some way of getting back to that. Where, you know, of course, the other thing is there is no such thing as hooking the ball anymore. And that was one of the great skills in the front row. But, I don't think I've seen it. It's going straight into the second row now. So another skill set is being lost. So maybe it's time to re-look at that again as well, to let the hookers get back to doing what they used to do.
Playing here in the States, the one thing that you could just watch the referee, because the referee had to watch offsides, had to also watch whether the ball was being fed, into the back row of the scrum. Whereas now it's perfectly acceptable and you can't go offsides because the assistant referees, the touch judges now are empowered. That's kind of ruined the likes of somebody like me that relied on cheating, but that doesn't matter. But yeah, you're right. If you woke up tomorrow morning, George, and you were chairman of World Rugby, you replaced Sir Bill Beaumont, what's your first move?
My first move is, and it's the only move, is to call a high-part conference, the equivalent of a climate change conference, and tell the coaches, we actually don't give a hoot what you think. We are going to tell you the way this game is going to be played. And we're going to have a game that it can be played by children, can be played by part-timers, in other words, people who have a job Monday to Friday and play rugby for fun on Saturday, and can be played by professionals. If we don't, rugby's going to become like the NFL in America, where you have 350 million people and you have 1,000 footballers who play after college. Nobody else plays football after college. Rugby has been, since Victorian times, a game of participation. We must get back to participation.
Dick, same question. You are tomorrow the chairman of the board of directors of World Rugby.
I think the first thing I would do is, we're just talking about, have player welfare as a major item on that. I think that we need to get back to restricted season and less pressure on the players, so they can, get through their rugby careers without major injuries and not have the problems that have been piling up recently. And again, I think you cut the cloth according to, do you have to have 15 aside for schoolboys, for example? Take out 2 wing forwards and you open up the game. And, I still find schoolboy rugby very exciting side on the pitch, but you could make it more exciting. These guys want to run, no inhibition, and, they're not all. So I would put the player safety as number one issue on the agenda.
Fair enough. And before I let you guys go, we had the All Blacks come onto American soil here in Washington, D.C., and the result was lopsided, to say the least. But what's kind of lost in all this, the match against Ireland was postponed allegedly because of the COVID. That's for debate. But would you guys have been interested in seeing that USA-Ireland match, particularly on the heels of the thrashing that the All Blacks laid on us?
It's now 30 years since World Rugby, or whatever it was called, the international board said, America, the sleeping giant of World Rugby.
Yeah. And we're going to keep it that way.
It's still fast asleep.
Dick, as a player, if you were on the American team, would you want to have played the All Blacks and then played Ireland?
I don't think it does that good for the game for either side. I think there's a huge gap between the top division teams and the next division teams. And certainly, I don't think it's good for they obviously like the idea of playing the best team in the world, but the gap is so wide, I don't think it's good for either. Unfortunately, the game last Saturday in Ireland, the gap was, the Japanese, who I thought they were going to be a force to be reckoned with, but they played like a third division team in Lansdowne Road last Saturday. And that's not good for the game either. So I think there are a lot of questions about whether you should pit these teams against one another. It improves the weaker team and certainly does nothing for the stronger team.
All right, I'm going to leave on a positive note. I want you guys, in your lifetime, one moment that stands out in your rugby lives that was a positive. George, go ahead.
I think it's I saw in 1954, I'm a 13-year-old schoolboy, and I'm peering through the wooden fence in the Mardyke in Cork, and the New Zealanders have arrived. And remember, they haven't been in Europe since before World War II. So there's nobody in the ground who's seen the haka. And we see the haka. And then Dick is too young to remember that, but as proud Munster men, he and I will know that every time a touring side came to Munster and played in Cork or Limerick, they got the fright of their lives. And that 1954 match was the first time I saw a touring team get a fright, and then I saw consecutive frights for the rest of my life. I've never forgotten that day in Cork.
Yeah, I would say the watching O'Gara kick drop goals for the Five Nations, Six Nations, or in fact, indeed, Johnny Sexton dropping a goal against France. I think it was about 4 years ago. I was listening to the game on the radio down in New Zealand, and I think we had about 39 parts of play, and then Sexton. And I think he was playing in Paris at the time, possibly with Racing. And as the teams were shaking hands afterwards, you could see each of the French guys saying to Sexton, "You be."
Yeah.
Great moment.
I'm surprised neither one of you named the Irish win over the All Blacks at Soldier Field. I thought that might be up there, but okay, fair enough. Great memories, great stuff. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. I could talk to you guys for hours about rugby. I really appreciate you coming on, and I wish you the best and yours.
And Matt, we'll talk to you about hurling and football the next time as well.
Fair enough. On behalf of Mr. Dick Spring and Mr. George Hook, I'm Matt McCarthy for Rugby Wrap-Up. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. And please check out our other segments, including our exclusive with the man they call the Beast, plus the College Rugby Wrap-Up. And look out for our upcoming United Rugby Championship shows. And please sign up for our Rugby Wrap-Up American Red Cross Blood Donor Team.